Welcome to Realizing Resilience, a podcast from the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We're not behavioral health professionals, but we're your gateway to real conversations with the experts. Each episode, we'll delve into the vast landscape of mental health, from personal stories to expert insights. Together, we'll bridge the gap between clinical expertise and personal experiences, connecting with diverse voices and perspectives. Join us for insightful conversations that demystify the world of mental health.
Christine Saari, MA, C-IAYT, is a certified yoga therapist, writer, and educator whose clinical work focuses on supporting individuals with anxiety, trauma, and the complex realities of living through and beyond cancer. A breast cancer survivor herself, Christine brings lived insight and clinical expertise to her work with clients navigating treatment, recovery, and survivorship. Her approach is deeply individualized, combining evidence-informed yoga practices with compassionate, present-centered care. As co-founder of Yoga Therapy Associates and director of
Clinic Ally
Trained, Christine is committed to integrating yoga therapy into clinical care and training the next generation of yoga professionals to work safely and skillfully with mental health and wellness concerns. She leads continuing education approved through DEMAS, NASWCT, NASW New York, EMDRIA, and APA, as well as corporate wellness programs for healthcare providers. Christine contributes regularly to the Yoga Therapy Associates blog, translating research into practical strategies for both clients and clinicians. You can learn more about her work at the links in the description.
Days in my life that I just thought, okay, this is a familiar thing to be in this teaching role. I'm a former classical musician, and so teaching people one-on-one was something that felt very comfortable to me. But when you work with individuals in a private yoga setting, you discover that people have things they want to work on specific to their health, specific to their personal goals, both mental health and physical. And I realized I didn't really have the skills to address those things. So that led me to seek a yoga therapy education, which is beyond the scope of a yoga teacher. And throughout that process, over the course of a few years of study, I just found that it was such a rich way of not only helping those I was working with, but of course, helping myself. I feel like a lot of helping professionals find that working with these practices that are more integrative, somatic, or breath work or meditation, they can really benefit us just as much as the person we're working with. So I've really enjoyed exploring the research behind some of these practices and learning about the evidence-based nature that overlaps with the traditional practices from the yoga lineage. And it's just been a wonderful experience finding this path. I never set out to be a yoga therapist. One thing led to another, and here I am. So it's been a wonderful journey.
And you specialize using yoga to support clients dealing with medical trauma, including cancer. How can yoga support both physical and emotional healing?
So that is the main thing, right? Is when we are going through a major health event, whether it's cancer or something else, it can be traumatic in and of itself. So how do we support ourselves with all of the various symptoms we're experiencing? Physical symptoms, but also the fears. And I think, yoga was originally designed to address the suffering of the mind. And never has there been a moment of more suffering than when a person is going through a potentially life-threatening illness, or even just the fear of what is my body doing? It can cause a lot of disconnection. And we are starting to learn through the work in the trauma zone that this can cause us to become disembodied. It can really impact our relationship with our bodies. And that has real effects on our nervous system, as well as on our thoughts. And so supporting people with practices that can work on all of these levels, I think that's what makes yoga therapy really special, is that it is by definition holistic. So we may be giving practices for the body, but we might also be working with the nervous system, doing some breathing. And we might be working with some meditation and bringing awareness to the thoughts in the mind. So it really can be very potentially individualized to bring this slice of micro practices to the person to use in their real lives on their own. which can be, a wonderful resource to have for people going through these huge medical events in their lives.
I think yoga anyway can maybe seem a little bit intimidating to people unfamiliar with the scope of practice, like the range of practices that you can have. I think sometimes people envision like you're doing headstands on day one. So for people who maybe have symptoms from that physical condition that they're experiencing or have a disability anyway, or have fatigue or mental health symptoms that tie into their physical being, how do you adapt yoga to make sure that it's safe and supportive for everybody?
Such a great question. And I think that, yes, yoga can be incredibly intimidating. And we have this sense of what it means to do yoga, which is to wrap ourselves in a pretzel position, upside down, in a group with other people watching. Now, that does not sound like an accessible way of starting any activity, certainly not a yoga class. So I think this is where really yoga therapy is more about making it very accessible, and it should feel easy. So typically practices are not an hour of a variety of things, but rather it might be one thing that a person is doing for 5 minutes twice a day. So that might mean a breathing exercise. And you mentioned, some of the specific symptoms. So people come with, I have fatigue. That's a great example. So if someone said, I have fatigue, we might be using a practice called Yoga Nidra, which is a rest practice that puts the brain in a hypnagogic state, half asleep, half awake, kind of like the body is asleep and the mind is awake. And we see that we get into these healing brainwave states that are associated with deep sleep. So we can start to support the immune system and support this deep sense of restorative rest in the daytime hours. So we might be doing that for 10 minutes at 11 a.m. And that can really, I've seen, help with this chronic fatigue. I am myself a breast cancer survivor. And so fatigue is actually something I am still working with. And if you know me, I'm a very energetic person. I like to go, go, go. I'm very driven by nature. And so it can be really, really uncomfortable for me to feel fatigue and cause, a lot of fear. Like, am I broken? So that is one really great example, I feel like, to use practices with something like fatigue that can really make a difference. So I just have to remind myself to do it more often. And that's another part of the process, right? Is getting that support to use small things in your real life. That's also part of yoga therapy as well.
And switching this over to a bit more of like an educational lens, you're co-leading a training with Sara Merrick-Albano on September 26th that focuses on supporting clients with depression. And in your experience, what are some signs that a client might benefit from integrating yoga therapy alongside more traditional talk therapy? And what might that integration look like in practice?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to provide this content. Bringing these types of skills into the mental health scope has been a real passion that's evolved over the last few years with talking to therapists and providers in mental health care that, this is an area that having an evidence-based lens on some of these practices has been really useful. So when working with clients with depression, we know that there is literature saying exercise is helpful, but I think this really gets back to the idea of the specific nature of yoga therapy. So instead of saying to someone, you need to do all of this activity now, that's just not going to happen, right? So we kind of meet the person where they are at. And providing these skills in a clinical context might look like doing some uplifting heart opening or gentle seated back bends in a chair with possibly some breath holding, as long as that's a safe practice for the person's health history, and kind of getting a little energy into the system and moving in small doses very slowly. I've seen over time that this can really change the affect of inertia that can take over, and that the motivation is slow to build, but slower and steady can be a wonderful entry into movement. Whereas, if you just tell someone, go to the gym, it's a great idea, but we know that that typically doesn't work in situations where we're dealing with either treatment resistant depression or MDD. So training therapists on, what is a simple skill you can do and how to use it within the work that you're already doing, and how to actually assign it with support tools, for example, audio or visual resources to that person so they feel confident in practicing that on their own throughout their week. And then we start to see the nervous system shift, and some of those symptoms start to change, and that really opens up new avenues for healing with depression. So I'm really, really excited to share that content with everyone at the Women's Consortium this fall.
And I don't have a consistent yoga practice now, but I got into it. I have depression. It was significantly after I was diagnosed. I think that even in general would have been such a better introduction into movement, because I remember, I'm going to put my dad on blast, but I don't think he even knows we have a podcast. So when I when I first contracted depression, which is a thing my friend in grad school used to say that I think is so funny, my dad was like, "Well, I just go to the gym to feel better. I just work out every day." And it was like, "Cool, but I'm laying in bed for 10 hours a day. I can't just start running or start weightlifting like at the place that I'm at mentally and physically right now." And even like an all levels yoga situation, I feel like is just so much more gentle and accessible and understanding of where people are at. And so I just love the idea of integrating it into depression treatment, because it, unfortunately, moving your body does work, but it can be so intimidating and just impossible.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure your dad loves you a lot. But yeah, that is such a common experience of, getting this well-intentioned advice that is just not going to happen. And I myself had, my sister suffered from lifelong depression, and she actually unfortunately died by suicide when this was a long time ago. So I'm very familiar with the desperation of family members, like, what can I do to support this person? And no, it is not a quick fix. It is not about do what I do, it works for me, but we're not feeling the way the person with depression is feeling. I had a bit of a slice of deep depression during my chemotherapy journey, and yeah, it's a beast. But using these very small practices, like some of them in bed, can activate yourself a little bit in bed laying down. And I love the idea of not having to leave the house. That can be a game changer as well. So using a breathwork practice in your home, in your pajamas, standing in your kitchen, or a really gentle version of Warrior One. We're not like taking a long lunge and doing a massive back bend with our arms all the way up in the air. Like that doesn't always feel great to force the nervous system into these extreme states. So how do we work, progressively and gently, like you said? And I just think, chair yoga has been a major game changer for a lot of people, doing yoga in bed, doing it on the couch. These are all entry points, right? And we don't need to be able to touch our toes. Actually, you never need to be able to do that. So it's really not all about flexibility. If I had to say anything about these practices, I would say they're nervous system based. These are ways of using embodiment and mindfulness and working directly with the nervous system through breath in order to change our state slowly at a tolerance that we feel comfortable with, right? So it doesn't have to be sprints. Definitely shouldn't be sprints. Not in that situation anyway.
I think one thing that's so nice about yoga too is that it's forgiving in a way that sometimes circumstance or other people are not or can't be. It gives you the grace to be wherever you're at. It meets you where you are. So if that's in bed, then it's in bed. If that's in your pajamas, then it's in your pajamas. If it's while you're cooking, if it's while you're doing something, then great. And like Lana said before, you don't have to be standing on your head to get anything out of it. It could just be, I think sometimes, regardless of how we're feeling, whether we are laying in bed or laying on the couch with the weight of everything on our shoulders, or we're go, 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 it allows you to take a breath
Mm-hmm.
and it gives you the space to do so.
Yeah. And what if where we're at is really suffering in our minds? I mean, just think about the shame, like the isolation that is so characteristic of depression. And we just lose faith, right, in ourselves and like hope access to hope for the future. And it can really be so isolating. And so I think that's another side of yoga, is this cultivating this curious mindset about the mind. Like, wow, my mind is just really saying horrible things to me right now. And there they are. And that feeling of like, you are not your thoughts, that is written right into the Yoga Sutras. And how do we make a practice of holding space for the way that our thoughts are without even changing them, and accepting like, this is what my mind is saying to me right now. And this invitation for self-love that may not be available in that moment, and that is okay. So yeah, it's the meditation side, and even there is, of course, the spiritual side, which is probably the least talked about in the fitness culture, right? And in depression, this can be really helpful. The spirituality in yoga is defined as anything that makes you feel connected to something greater than yourself. And what could be more soothing when you're completely isolated and disconnected from yourself, from everyone else they don't understand? So these are ways, there are very short kind of formulaic practices that can be adapted to a person's beliefs, or, special aspects unique to the individual. And we can make these little, almost like routine touch points for tapping into that spiritual connection, that sense of, I don't know, maybe it's a tree growing outside of your window, and we like use some mindfulness with observing it, or sense, all of the other people in the world suffering from depression, and send out some love to them, right? These are all just different ideas, but that is one part of working with people with depression that I think I'm really excited to share in the training, is some of the ways that we can use non-dogmatic, not belief-specific, customized ways of introducing this sense of routine connection to something greater than ourselves. And there is research that spirituality has a place in mental health care, so we'll kind of look at some of that as well. So yeah, I'm excited for that.
That was a nice little tidbit that I didn't know. That I didn't know about this training. That was exciting to learn. So, in reference to the training, I've popped in on you guys before, and the room is always like filled with yoga mats. It's very hands-on, very community oriented. Why do you run it that way? Like, why is it valuable for clinicians to know how to do the practice before they then bring it to their clients?
So this really comes out of listening to clinicians that take trainings. And actually, I have sat in on several mental health trainings myself. And what I have noticed and what I have heard a lot is, it's not just the technique that people want, it's how to actually use it. So for example, like how to offer it to somebody that you already have a working relationship with. Maybe you're on telehealth, or maybe they're sitting in a comfortable upholstered chair in your office. How do you transition to, I want to do this thing with you? What are the words that you might say? And how do we do it in a trauma-informed way? So that's part of it, the real practical aspects of offering the practice. And then what is the practice? How do I work that out with my client and make a choice for them that, they can work with me, giving feedback like, oh, I preferred this, or that didn't feel quite right. How do we modify things and get it so that it's, the very perfect practice for them? And then how do you offer it outside of session? So what are the ways of making a HIPAA compliant audio recording, right? Like, and how do you deliver that in software? So these are all like really nitty gritty things. Never mind, how do you actually say the words to teach the practice? For sure, we definitely talk about the research and framing, like these are the frameworks. So we're providing some evidence-based guidance as to, this is what the literature says about depression and inflammation in the brain. But really what we're interested in is, this is the approach, and how do we customize it to the person and actually deliver it? So our trainings are very, I don't know if hands-on is the right word, because we don't like touch our clients ever, but I would definitely say experiential. And, if you get to go to a training and you get to experience things as opposed to just sitting there listening and feeling all locked up in your chair all day, then people typically enjoy that. Of course, we always tell them, like, you don't have to get on the floor. Almost everything we offer can be done in a chair or standing up because not everybody is comfortable getting on the floor, but the invitation is there. And I would say about half and half. Half the people tend to do the floor version, and the other half tend to do the chair or standing versions of most things. So yeah, it's fun. It's good fun, and it's about, I would say, at least half of the training is experiencing things, maybe like 2/3. So that's worked well. I think it's been well received in the past, and certainly fun to see people trying these things out, right?
Yeah, it's definitely been well received, and I'm excited about because I think in the time that I've been here, you've done trauma-informed yoga, so it's awesome to see it narrowed to more specific applications too. Like obviously, it's all trauma-informed. That's a thread that carries. I think it differs depending on what physical symptoms people might be experiencing or mental symptoms. So I think that's great. And thank
Yeah,
you
for
for
sure.
your
The trauma.
vulnerability.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me here to talk about this. We do have content regarding anxiety, frameworks for applying breath work for different mental health conditions. And we actually have some EMDR specific content, like using techniques within different phases of EMDR. So it's really evolved through these conversations and the feedback that we get at the trainings. If someone comes and they have an idea, we're always open, always learning.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I like that we also got to learn, Alana and I, who know what the trainings are and all that, got to learn a little bit about it too, which makes it even that more exciting just to know what's about to come up and what the content is. So I really appreciate you talking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person this fall.
Links will be in the description to sign up for Yoga for Depression on September 26th. Check out our links below to keep up with us at the Connecticut Women's Consortium. Thank you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.